this isn't about words. Words are what we use to convey something. But what is being conveyed is what matters, not the words. Sid Banks, the Scottish mystic who was first articulated these three principles, he would always say, don't listen to my words. And when I used to listen to that, I was like, what am I supposed to listen to then? And what I learned was to listen for a feeling, to listen for the quiet behind the words, the space out of which the words were being spoken, the space to which the words were pointing. And they say that music is in the space between the notes. If you just played all the notes really fast, it wouldn't sound like music. It would just sound like noise. But because there's space between the notes, we hear the noise as music. Well, this is the same kind of conversation. If we focus on just the words, they'll be good. They're good words. But if we notice the page that the words are written on, we notice the space in which the words are coming up, then we get a feeling from it. We kind of get a hit off it. We get insight. We see things for ourselves that may or may not be directly, obviously connected to the words, but they come out of the space. They come out of that feeling that is our natural feeling. It's the simple feeling of being. And in the language that we tend to use in this community, we could talk about that space as the formless, as opposed to the form. So, this pen is the form. I'm in the form. This coffee cup is in the form, but there is an invisible energy. And in physics, they talk about, well, yes, it's the quantum nature of, before there are even atoms, there are these small, and it's like, it would be before even that. What is the space into which the Big Bang occurred? Now, I can't pretend to know exactly what that is and be able to describe it in a way that everybody will see it. But every now and again, I really sense it when my thinking mind gets a little bit quieter. It settles, and I get a little bit more present. I get a little bit more here. I kind of catch my breath a little bit and like, okay, I don't need to figure everything out right now. I remember I used to be so busy-minded that I had to kind of, on dog walks, remind myself that I don't have to solve the world right now. I don't have to make sure that my kids are going to be okay. I don't have to grow my business. I can just walk the dogs. And on those days, on those nights, I have really good dog walks. And sometimes I'm filled with good feelings, and sometimes it's like a download from the universe. I see so much. And sometimes I just have a nice walk with the dogs. Well, we can have that experience anywhere. So this talk is called Living from the Inside Out. Well, in this sense, the inside is this formless, and the word that is just the accurate word, this formless spiritual reality. Spirit being the invisible aliveness in life, that which animates all forms. So the formless permeates the form. We are all, as the Guru Ram Dass described, we are all God in drag. We are all this energy in a form, in a unique form. In Mark form, in Elisa form, in Anya form, in Ulrika form, in Monica form, in Micah form, in Annette form, in Craig form. One energy, many, 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 many forms. And the direction of travel is always formless to form. The form cannot influence the formless because the formless is everything. So everything flows from formless to form, from the spiritual to the material, from inside out. And that just turns out to be really, really significant in the way that we live our lives. To the extent that we see that, we then go, well, how does that work? How does this formless reality become form? And what Sid Banks pointed out, he didn't invent, he didn't create, but pointed out, is that there is this power of thought, this principle of thought, that's the missing link between the formless spiritual reality and our psychological thought-created reality that we live in. And that without thought, there would be no differentiation in the world. We would all simply just be floating around, but it would be undifferentiated. Without the thought, oh, you're a man, you're a woman, I am American, you are German. Without all that thinking and all the stories that go with all that thinking, we're just here. But thought can be incredibly helpful because thought is the tool that creates all my experience. We are living in the feeling of our thinking, not the feeling of an external world, not the feeling of our circumstances. And when we see that, it's difficult to get scared of your own experience if you realize that it's your thinking that's creating it. It's difficult to. So one of the things that has been very apparent to me in America in the last week, we had an election. I don't know if you guys heard about it. People have a lot of opinions about it. I don't know if you've noticed that. But one of the things that's been very helpful to me, and this isn't it's not my first rodeo, it's not the first time I've seen it, is recognizing that it's not a question of people looking at the same thing and having different opinions. That's how people think the world works. Reality is what reality is, and I see it this way, and you see it that way, and my way is better than your way, and blah, 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 blah. But we actually live in separate realities. And what we do and how we think makes perfect sense inside that reality. If I live in a reality where aliens are trying to get into my brain to get secret information that will help them take over the earth, I don't. But if I did, it would make a lot of sense for me to wear a tinfoil hat to stop the alien mind rays from reading my mind. That would be a sane response in that world. But if I don't live in that world, that just looks nutty. If I live in a world where people who don't look like me are out to get me, and they're out to take away my well-being and my right to be and well, of course I'm going to try and stop that. It would be crazy not to. It's just that that's not the real world. That's a thought-created world. And we're all living in our own thought-created realities, separate realities. Because everything comes from nothing, all form comes via thought from the formless, from the one energy, the oneness. And ultimately, Sid would say, when you can see in the singular. So I can look at another human being and see both the human and the being, both the spirit and the material, both the I that is we, the thing in them that is also in me. There's a word in I don't know what I think it's in Hindi, but there's a word namaste. And translated into English, it roughly would translate as, I honor the space in you in which the entire universe resides. I honor the space in you of love, of light, of truth, and of peace. And when you are in that space in you, and I am in that space in me, there is only one of us. So that's the being part of the human being. But then there's also the human, has your own thoughts and your own feelings and your own experiences and your own way of living in your own separate reality. And there's a perfection to all of it. But if we don't like our experience of reality, we're not stuck with it because it's made of thought, and thought is the most fluid thing in the universe. It's like, I remember this from my high school physics, so this may not be completely accurate. But my memory is that water can take 3 forms. It can be a gas, so if you boil water, it becomes gaseous, it becomes invisible. It can consolidate back into water, and then it's liquid and it's fluid. It can freeze into ice, and then it appears solid. But it's all the same stuff, whether in formless or form. And so the formless gas becomes the ocean, and the ocean creates an iceberg, and I try to navigate my ship through the icebergs. But if the icebergs melted, it would be so much easier to navigate my ship. And when our thought forms, our thought bergs start to melt, they start to look less fixed and more fluid, then life becomes much easier to navigate. I was coaching, funnily enough, he was a German banker many years ago. And he reached out to me because he had a terrible fear of death. He was a fairly young man. I mean, he was in his late 30s, early 40s. And at first I thought, oh, because I was just learning about living from the inside out. So I kind of thought, oh, well, we need to check. And I checked, is your will in order? Do you have your affairs in order? Perhaps you're scared because it's letting you know you need to do something. And he did do all that. And he was grateful that he did it, but it didn't help at all. Like he was still he couldn't sleep. He hadn't slept properly in years. He was exhausted because he was so scared of dying. And I was at the edge of my understanding. I didn't really get it, but I kind of got there was something to get. And so I said to him, well, would it keep you awake if you didn't think about it? And he went, I don't know. And I said, well, try that. And it was funny because I hung up the phone. We were on the phone. And I thought, what an asshole am I? Like, what a stupid thing to say to somebody. Well, don't think about it. But you know what? He came back on our next call, and he said, I've slept beautifully since our last call. And part of me was really happy for him. And part of me was really kind of upset about it. Like, that's the best advice I can give to another human being is, well, don't think about it. And so I went to my coach, my mentor, and I asked her about it. And she said, well, I probably would have said, you don't have to think about it. And I was like, yeah, that's what I said. And I couldn't let it go. And I went off to lunch, and I came back and I was like, no, I refuse to accept that this is the best we've got to offer people, is don't think about what feels bad. And she said, what do you think I said? And I had written it down. So I read it off to her. You said I would tell him that you don't have to think about it. And she laughed and said, that's not what I said. And I was like, okay, what did you say? And she said, I would probably tell him, you don't have to think that. Now, I don't know how the translation is going to treat this, so just bear with me and hopefully it will make sense. But for me, the difference between you don't have to think about it and you don't have to think that is an understanding that reality is created by thought, that our reality is made of this invisible power that we call thought with a capital T. Not the specific things that we think, but the power behind it that creates a reality. The physicist David Bohm said, thought creates the world, and then says, I didn't do it. But if I don't have to think about something, that suggests the thing is real and fixed, but I don't have to think about it. But I don't have to think that. Means I don't even have to create that reality in the first place. And when it hit me, and it did hit me, I was kind of stunned. And I remember sitting there, and it was like a Salvador Dali painting in my mind where everything melts, like reality melts into a river of color and flows. And that was my internal world melting. And all of my ideas about myself and the world, and I'm this and I'm that, and the world's this and the world's that, just stopped looking solid and fixed and went back into the river of thought from whence they came. And that included the good stuff, the stuff I liked. Well, I like being a good person and I like being this, but that melted too. It wasn't just the bad stuff. All of it was up for grabs. And then in my mind, the way it happened was there were these three things, these three islands in the flow of the river of thought that didn't melt. And they were what we call the three principles. They were the principle of thought, the unchanging fact that all of us are born with the gift of thought. We are born able to create reality with thought. Now, very few of us do it purposefully. Very few of us are even conscious that we have anything to do with it. We think we have thinking about reality. We don't realize that we have thinking and opinions about a reality that is made of thought. So all of the thought forms melted, but the power of thought can't go anywhere. It's a constant. That's why we call it a principle. A principle is something that is highly predictive, that is always true, and that is fully explanatory. That's the scientific definition of a principle. So the principle of thought, if I understand that we're living in thought-created realities and then responding as if we're living in a real solid world, well, that explains everything. That explains how somebody can vote for the other person and not the person I vote for. That explains how 1 minute I can be on top of the world and the next minute I can be so low and nothing really happened. That explains how I can be sitting side by side with my partner in a movie and she comes away thinking it was the best movie ever made, and I come away thinking, how the hell did that even make it to the screen? because we're living in separate realities made of this principle of thought. Now, the second island, there were 3 islands in the string, 3 principles. The second island in the string was what we call the principle of consciousness. And some people would describe consciousness as awareness. Some people talk about it as understanding, like really understanding, getting it, knowing. And those are fine descriptions. But consciousness is what allows us to experience both our thought-created reality and the spiritual formless reality underneath it at the same time. And to understand what we're experiencing by the feeling of it. So in the thought-created reality, I experience the feeling of emotions, and I'm happy or sad or angry or scared, and it's like a roller coaster of emotion, depending on where my thinking is going. But simultaneously, at the same time, there's this unchanging, constant reality. And that has a feeling to it. That has a feeling of stillness. That has a feeling of quiet. That has a feeling of presence. It has a feeling of aliveness. One of the best descriptions I've ever heard of it is it's the feeling of shining eyes. There's a beautiful story by a principal's teacher who's working with a young boy who was really struggling and couldn't really communicate what was wrong. And she finally just said to him, "What do you want?" And she thought he'd find that a difficult question or that he wouldn't respond at all. But in fact, he immediately lit up and said, "I want shining eyes." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, sometimes I see people and their eyes are shining. And I want to be like that." And that's a description of somebody who's lit from within. The light of spirit, the light of life, the light of aliveness animates us. And to the outside world, it looks like shining eyes. Now, it doesn't work backwards, unfortunately. I've tried it. You can't just try and fake shining eyes and suddenly feel alive. It works from the inside out, not from the outside in. Trying to fake it till you make it doesn't really work any more than wagging a dog by its tail is going to make the dog happy. Right? Well, if a dog wags his tail, he's happy. So if I just wag the tail, shouldn't the dog be happy? Don't try this at home if it's not your dog. No, it does not make the dog happy. It does not make the dog happy at all. But we try to do that to ourselves and others. We try to get them to copy the forms of happiness and success and whatever else, not realizing that they're the effect of the space we're living from, the space within. And if we're living from our heads, we have an emotional experience of life. And if we're living from this deeper dimension, this world of deeper feelings, then we have a completely different experience of life. We still have thought-created realities, but they don't feel as solid. They don't feel as fixed. We're not at the mercy of them. I remember one person saying that the difference that she noticed for herself after being in this conversation for a while was, I still have thinking, but it doesn't have me. I sometimes think of it like if you've ever gone to a bar or a pub or a restaurant that has TVs up and they're usually showing sport or news with the sound low. And if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, it's like it can be distracting. But you also can usually redirect your attention to be with whatever you're with, whoever you're with. And occasionally the TV will grab your attention. And occasionally there's actually something you're interested in on it. Well, that's the relationship we start to have with our own minds. It's like the TV on over the bar. Yeah, it's on a lot, and it's on different channels at different times, but we don't really have to pay attention to it very often, unless it's actually telling us something that we want to hear, that is helpful for us. And so we have dominion. We can't always change the channel, but we get to decide when to listen. There's a phrase in English that I very much like, which I think is very relevant to it, which is, don't believe everything you think. And that just means that, it's always on. And consciousness lets us experience it, but it also lets us see through it, see past it, see underneath it. There's a huge river in America called the Mississippi River. And it's in places it's so wide it looks like a lake. And it flows pretty much the length of from the top of the country to the bottom. And on the surface of the river, sometimes it's still and sometimes it's chaotic, depending on weather. Right? Sometimes it's really bumpy to be in a boat on it, and sometimes it's really smooth. And that's what it's like when we live from our heads, when we stay stuck in our little perspective and this is the world, this is the world, this is the world. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's bumpy, and there's not a hell of a lot we can do about it. But if you go just 3 feet down, the river's just smooth and flowing, no matter what the weather. So at the same time as the surface is choppy, just a few feet down, the river is just flowing. And if you went all the way down, then the river is still moving, but it's moving so slowly that it feels like a living stillness, like an alive calm, if you've ever had an experience in a meditation or drifting off to bed at night of just a deeper quiet and a deeper stillness. And they're all happening all the time. So my head can be going 1,000,000 miles a minute, but if I can drop out of my head even a little, I can just step into a flow of fresh thought. And if I happen to drop down and settle down even more, I start to experience this deeper quiet, this deeper stillness, which is why it actually doesn't matter what's happening on the surface. I don't need to make my thoughts better so that it's less stormy on the surface. I just need to drop down a little bit into a flow of fresh thought, or sometimes even deeper into the stillness within. And in the stillness, in the quiet, we hear new and fresh. We have insights, sights from within. And they teach us. And we could call that the wisdom within. And that wisdom within comes from the third island in the stream. So one thing that didn't melt in my river was thought. Another thing that didn't melt in my river was consciousness, because all people think. We are all infinitely creative because we're creating our own realities moment by moment. We are all conscious. We have the gift of awareness. And that consciousness shows up in us as attention. And attention leads to noticing. And when we start to notice that stillness and that calm and that flow and that presence, life becomes so much fuller and so much richer, and we feel more and more alive but it's a quiet aliveness. It may sometimes manifest as like, but often it's just a feeling of being alive and present and engaged in life. And it's the feeling people crave. It's the feeling we all love. Most people, when you talk to them about it, go, oh, well, there was this one time, and we remember it even if it was years ago, because we just felt so damn good, so damn present, so damn capable. But we don't realize that's our nature. That's always available, 24/7, underneath the noise of our thinking, even underneath the flow of our engagement with whatever it is that we're doing. And so the third island, the third principle, the third unchanging element in a world that's made of liquid gold, liquid thought, was what we call the principle of mind, the energy and intelligence of all things, whether in form or formless. I sometimes talk about mind as the God principle because it's everything, everywhere, all at once. And whether we're in touch with it or not, we're made of it. And consciousness allows us to notice it. So a lot of the time we direct consciousness, we direct our attention outside into the world of form. And so what we see is, well, yes, and this is happening and that's happening. And then we don't even notice that we go from, well, this is happening and that's happening to, and this is good and that's bad, and this is right and that's wrong, and this is better and that's worse. And life looks complicated and hard. But when we direct consciousness, when we direct attention inward, before the form, we look back out into the world with new eyes. And we see new, we see different. The world just looks different. And because the world looks different, we do different. See, the beautiful thing when you start to realize that we're all living from the inside out, we just don't know it, is that change is natural. Change is inevitable. Change is simple. It's just that we go about it completely backwards, upside down and backwards. We try to change our behavior because we think our behavior is bad, or we try to get other people to change their behavior. You shouldn't do this. You should do that. You shouldn't wear a tinfoil hat. You should not wear a tinfoil hat. You shouldn't be scared. You should be brave. You shouldn't this. You should that. And we try. We honestly try it until we give up. Because it's really doesn't make sense to take off my tinfoil hat as long as the aliens are penetrating my brain. It really doesn't make sense to pretend everything's okay when I know they're out to get me. It really doesn't make sense to stop drinking or to drink less when alcohol is the one thing that makes me feel okay. But I'll try. And if I work really, really, really hard, I might even pull it off for a while. But if I suddenly see, and by the way, I have nothing against alcohol, big fan. But if I suddenly see that for me, alcohol is rat poison, I'm done drinking. No effort required, right? Nobody has ever come to me, and I've been coaching for over 30 years. No one has ever come to me and said, hey, could you help me give up eating rat poison? I've been drinking rat poison and I really should stop. Nobody's ever asked me that. Because everybody kind of knows, yeah, why the hell would I drink rat poison? Nobody has ever come to me and said, hey, I've got this really bad habit. Could you help me stop poking myself in the eye with a fork? Because nobody thinks poking themselves in the eye with a fork is a good idea. But they'll come and say, hey, can you help me stop eating so much? Can you help me stop drinking so much? Can you help me stop being so angry? Can you help me stop this? And I know that as long as they believe what they think, as long as they're thinking a reality into being that's very scary or very aggressive or very this or very that, they're going to struggle to change that. But if they wake up even a little bit to the fact of thought, its malleability, its changeability, in literally everyone is one thought away from a whole new experience of being alive, from a whole new reality. Because we're living in these separate psychological thought-created realities. And the second they live in a world where whatever it is that they're doing doesn't look like a good idea, they'll stop. No problem. You know, people say, oh, no, it takes a long time to change. There's scientific studies that show that the brain needs to rewire and blah. But if you've ever moved house, you know that it takes about 1 second to change a habit, right? If I've been driving to my old house every day for 20 years, and then I move to a new house, how many times do I have to do the new way before I start taking it? Usually once. And occasionally I may be caught up in my head and accidentally start going towards the old house. But as soon as I remember, I'm back on track. See, that our habits only make sense in the world we're living in. When we move into a new world, they just don't make sense anymore. So we don't do them. Or different things do make sense and we just start doing them. Right? If you know, my body's just this thing and I don't care about it and it's just, oh, I wish it was felt better, but well, then exercise. I probably should exercise. Eating different. Yeah, I probably should eat different. Yeah, let me hire somebody to help me do that. Like all this stuff. Oh, it's New Year's. I'm going to do it this year. But fundamentally, I still live in a world where it's just like this thing and I don't give a crap about it. As long as it's working, I'm fine. But if we fall in love with our bodies, like the way we would fall in love with a pet, like I have 2 beautiful dogs. I had 2 different beautiful dogs before them. I had 1 beautiful dog before the 2 beautiful dogs before these 2 beautiful dogs. I never treated myself, my own body, as well as I treated my dogs for years. Right? Like they got the best food, they got the best care. I made sure they got walks if I couldn't walk them, somebody else was going to walk them. I let them run around. I mean, honest, to make sure they were loved and knew they were loved. Right? You know, and I treated this like kind of like a piece of shit that I had to deal with sometimes. And then one day it occurred to me that maybe, just maybe, it might make sense to treat my body as kindly as I treated my dogs. And funnily enough, I started exercising and I stopped eating some of the things I used to eat and started eating some new things, but I didn't try. I wasn't doing it because it was the good thing to do or the right thing to do or what I should do. I did it because suddenly I cared. And when we care about something, we treat it differently than when we don't care about it. And nobody can make you care about something, but also nobody can stop you from caring. And so change is effortless when it happens at the level of reality. But we try to do it at the level of behavior within a reality where it makes no sense to change. So there's a beautiful little reflection written by a man named Anthony de Mello. And Anthony de Mello was a Jesuit priest who had an enlightenment experience and saw beyond just his religion to a deeper spiritual truth. And he was telling a story once. And he was essentially saying, everybody used to tell me that I needed to change. And I kind of knew they were right. And I kind of hated them for saying it. And I kind of wanted to change. And I really tried to change, but I couldn't. So I was constantly frustrated and never felt good enough. And he said, what bothered me most was that my best friend said I should change. And I didn't know what to do. And he said, and then one day my friend turned around and said, you know what? Don't change. I love you as you are. And he said those words bounced around inside my head. Don't change. Don't change. Don't change. I love you as you are. And I breathed, and I relaxed, and I settled. And then I changed. That's how it works. That's how we're made. We try so hard to get it right, but you can't get it right. Now, the good news is if you can't get it right, you can't get it wrong. And if you love the reality you're living in, why would you change? But if you find the reality you're living in hard or stressful or difficult, then you're one thought away from a whole new experience of being alive, because our experience of life is being created moment to moment to moment via these three principles: mind, the energy and intelligence of all things, whether in form or formless; consciousness, the power to see, the power to experience, the capacity to understand at a deep level, to see beyond the form, to the heart of life; and thought, the creative principle that is continually bringing our realities in and out of being. And our feelings tell us everything we need to know. They give us an inner warmer, colder. I don't know if you have the game. I assume every culture I speak to seems to have the game warmer, colder, where you're trying to direct somebody and they have their eyes closed and, they start walking, you go warmer, warmer, really hot, ooh, colder, 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 warmer, warmer, right? And it's like this guidance system. Well, our feelings are that for us. They're letting us know, hey, you're using thought when you feel all unsettled. That's just saying you're using thought in an unhelpful way. You're using thought, innocently misusing the gift of thought as a weapon against yourself, instead of as a tool to create reality. And when you feel that sort of flow and that presence, it's the system telling you, yeah, you're tuned back in. You're home. You're in that depth of the river, even as you're flowing with the river, even as whatever's happening on the surface is happening on the surface. And so much of psychology is all concerned with what's happening on the surface. Like, why am I so upset? Oh, you know what? Let me change my thinking and then it'll smooth it out. And it kind of does, right? It can do. You do NLP, you do CB2, you do TFT, you do DVT, you do all these different things, and they can sort of settle the surface of the river. But who cares what the surface of the river is like? If you're in the flow and you're in the depths, you can just kind of let the river do its thing, the weather be what it is. And then you have so much more headspace because you're not constantly trying to control your experience. One of my favorite quotes from Sid Banks is that if the only thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. If we realized, the moment we start to realize, we do not need to control this, because we can live from the depths, we can live from the inside, from the formless, out into the form. And then life becomes a game. Life becomes a dance. Life becomes a dream, but we can live the dream with open eyes. There was an English, I guess he was a military man initially, T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia is what he's famous as from the movies. And he said, all men dream, but not all equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their mind wake to find it was all vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous, for they may act their dreams with open eyes. and make things happen. And what living from the inside out, what understanding these principles and seeing them at play in your world does for us is it allows us to be awakened dreamers. Dreamers of the day who know that it's a dream, but live the dream full out and fearless. Who know that it's made up, but love playing in the land of make-believe. Of people who know it's a movie, but just enjoy the movie instead of trying to control how it turns out. So you can show up each day and just be you and see what happens. One of my other favorite Sid Banks lines is he says, if you drop your ego, your image of self-importance, and I want to speak just a little bit to that, because a lot of people think of ego as arrogance. But when I'm using the word ego, when Sid used the word ego, it's just talking about your self-image, your idea of you, who you think you are. When you drop your ego, your image of self-importance, and just be you, whoever that is, you'll find the secret to heaven here on earth. You'll find out that you're not who you think you are. You're something better, far nicer, really nice. And that's what's on offer in this conversation. Waking up to who you already are. Sid would talk about, for those of us who teach, for those of us who share, he said, we have the most beautiful job in the world. We get to travel around and we meet people at various stages of sleep. And we get to tap them on the shoulder and wake them up to the full magnificence of life. And that's what's on offer. That's all that's on offer, the full magnificence of life, the full magnificence of you. Like, you are freaking amazing, but not for what you've done. You literally are already a miracle before you start. And you're the only one of you. Like, that's why you can't get it right or wrong, because you're the only one. All you can do is live your best life. And that's just much easier to do when you understand how life works, how our experience gets created from the inside out, from formless to form, via thought, which creates the form, and consciousness, which makes it seem real, and mind, which animates the whole process and brings it to life. And when you live from here, life really is an adventure. And it's not without challenges. But somehow the challenges feel like part of the adventure instead of an interruption. I come from the world of sketch comedy. That's what I used to do for a living. And one of the, one of the things about comedy is, something, you can't explain why something is funny. You either get the joke or you don't. And you got the joke because you laugh. This conversation is a lot like that. You can't figure this out. But when you get the joke, when you catch a glimpse of how made up your reality is, how made up all our realities are, when you start to see how unbelievably powerful a being you are, how huge you are. The poet Walt Whitman said, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then. I contradict myself. I am huge. I contain multitudes." When you get it the way you get a joke, life becomes a completely different experience. And it's never more than one thought away. So, those of you who are going on to explore this in the conference over the next few days, I invite you to just have the best freaking time of your life and just sit back and listen, but listen beyond the words. Listen for the space that the words are coming from and see what you see for you. Thank you.